Okay, right,
Yeah.
welcome back. So as we were saying just before the break, we were looking at what the EU's role was, what it has been over the past 20, 30 years or so, what it is now, and how you envisage that it's likely to be going forward. And going forward means a Brexit or a Brexin.
Right, yeah.
So
Well,
I'm unclear about that.
I think a brief historical context. Again, I would ask people, we don't have time to really discuss the history, and in fact, I'm sure that isn't why you're here anyway, but to just put that in context, you know, the original core members, of which Britain wasn't part of, let's remember that we came in the second tranche of entries. So the first tranche of entries was pretty much about opening up trade between mainland Western Europe and creating some kind of agricultural support for what was quite an unmechanised, well, or non-industrialised agricultural production method of Italy and France notably, but then Germany sort of like came in there as kind of, no doubt they saw an opportunity there of growing their very sophisticated agriculture in France and Italy. And so, and then there were the other countries around that. And then Britain came into it and went, well, we really like the idea of free trade because we're a trading nation, let's not forget that. But really the agriculture thing, that isn't something, and we have kind of fought that common agricultural policy, or CAP or CAP, pretty much since we joined it, saying that we don't really need that, that isn't very helpful, it's going to create all sorts of market imbalances, and I think we're of an age that remember the wine lakes and the
cauliflower lakes and potato lakes and butter mountains.
Butter mountain, yes, the butter mountain was what I was trying to think of. And so we've seen flaws or errors in the market, in the economics. It hasn't been perfect, far from it. The support of those markets has actually caused imbalances, which I have met agricultural professionals really exist only because of Europe, and others who say they have been severely compromised. So just like this debate that we're having into the future, that has existed. It's not been perfect. Let's just like remember that it's made mistakes and it's done some really good things. And there are some arguments, there are some people out there, again, I'm sure you'll do the research yourself, who say that, you know, there are some people making vast amounts of money for doing very little.
But that report is useful because it does give a list of concrete achievements and disbenefits. If you're wondering what they were from the past, you can have a look in there. It's very helpful. Yeah. Without judgment, it just sets out what were the wins and what were the fails, really, which is what I was looking for.
Absolutely, and that's all we can do. And again, yeah, that's how it was. And so in the present, I think that's kind of changed. That's kind of how it started in the present. And please, people pitch in. It's been the environment, for my point, it's been the environmental persona that has kind of enveloped the European Union, that this very large purchasing organisation has been driven by, and by environment I'm not talking about like climate change, which is a massive element now of it. I was meaning a broader environment. There was a phrase in the original sign-up that said, and I'm paraphrasing, so please don't judge me too harshly, but it was something like, for the benefits, that actions would be carried out for the benefit and health and well-being of the individuals living within the European Union, or something like that. And it was just seen as just being a good idea, that we would look after people, we would make sure there wouldn't be contaminated food sold, that factories wouldn't carry out actions that would make people locally ill. But then it got kind of expanded on to being like, do you know what? We can make the world a better place. We can be at the real sharp edge, the pointy edge, of environmental legislation and policy that will drive the world forward. And there's no doubt Europe has introduced more environmental protection legislation than I believe, and again I'm quite happy to be wrong on this, but I believe that Europe has introduced more global and local legislation to protect the environment than the rest of the world put together. than the rest of the world put together.
That is probably true from my understanding of having, I can't say read the report because it's so large.
You have to
but from having read it to the best of my ability, the impression I get is that actually the UK has driven a lot of that debate.
Massively, massively. I mean, we were known as the dirty man of Europe when we joined Europe. Let's make that clear.
What do you mean by that?
If you look at all the soot and smoke when you used to drive up through Attercliff and up through the moor, it was all industrial pother and chimneys and massive
industry first, business first. You know, we were a small country. We've got very short rivers, and we don't store water a great deal. So if we put pollution into our environment, historically, that pollution would enter watercourses or into the air and be away from the UK very, very quickly. We're a very small country. So you pollute the water goes into the sea, and you don't have to think about it. You pollute the air, the wind blows generally from the south west to the northeast. That pollution, it's away. You know, unfortunately for Scandinavia, not so much, you know, and our original sort of coal-fired power stations, I'm of an age that I remember when acid rain, and I think that's still a term that some people are familiar with, but I'm pleased to say that our children don't know what that means. They know that that rain is mildly acidic, but they don't understand that during the 70s and 80s,
that was a major issue.
It was killing.
It was killing trees.
It was killing
tundra.
The ecology in our northeastern part of Europe.
And it was Europe. It was Europe that legislated for the scrubbing technology to be placed in the chimneys of our coal-fired power stations to pull the sulfur dioxide and the nitrous to a much lesser extent, but mostly the sulfur. So instead of making sulfuric acid in the air, which is what happens when you release oxides of sulfur, it was a lot cleaner. And so that's been done. And in the same sort of like way we've pushed, but on a better light. So Britain did that, but Britain sort of set the standard with the ozone. Who discovered the hole in the ozone layer? It was the Antarctic Survey, the British.
We chose to do that.
What freedoms there were to do things and what protections there were if I was going to stay in or move out.
Well,
how would my standard of life be affected? Could it get worse because everyone built factories at the bottom of my garden and polluted me?
Well, it was actually the other way around. What seems to have happened is that Britain set a standard, and which has since meant the closure of our pretty much the death knell, or whatever the term is, of our coal industry or coal produced power, which has then pushed up the price of electricity because the other forms of energy. Well, coal you get to pollute for free, whereas the other energy sources you don't. So coal seems cheaper. Obviously, I'm biased. I make absolutely clear that I'm very biased against coal-fired power, and people say it's cheaper, but it isn't if you do the whole costing. But anyway, we've taken that, and which has resulted in the cost, the actual unit cost of energy being higher, and that's one of the reasons what Tata said was why our steel factories are not as competitive. Because our energy prices, even though we have a preferential rate for large energy consumers like steelworks, it's still higher than the rest of the world. And so in a global market, the result of our environmental agenda, which I have a lot of time for, has meant that certain elements are, in the short term, more expensive. I would argue, though, that as the world sees energy production that produces carbon as something that we're not comfortable with, we will be the world leaders because we've been working on solving those problems, which we'll then be able to export to countries that are now looking for a more enlightened production. And we'll, as a nice small business exporting
company,
company,
about what you see as
and it moves us on.
Enlightened.
Well, I think Caroline's got an excellent sort of method of thinking about this.
About what, if you're going to choose one of 2 or 3 routes for your EU future or future in Europe, I would be thinking from a coaching point of view, I'd be looking at so what do I want as an individual, what do I want as my community community, and what do I want as my business? What would I be doing over the next 10 years? And then what does the landscape look like? What are my energy costs going to be? Really business planning ahead. So I would be looking at, what does it look like if I stay in? What does it look like if we join Norway? What does it look like if we leave? What does that mean for me and my business and my community? And then what are the challenges coming along in 10 years' time? So it does require you to do quite a bit of thinking.
But as a country, can you not create that future? You were sort of like saying that not only is it what you want,
oh yeah, you'd have a
you
plan
can
to
make.
move towards it. So if energy is going to become more expensive and firms have to invest internally, then they might look at different ways of operating. There's a lot of people setting up social enterprises now, going along the John Lewis model to recycle profit back into creating employment. So it will be looking at the sort of opportunities that we might get from staying in, moving out there, and also what the opportunities are for businesses who employ people, you know, just to keep going. What's your future as an economic unit, and how's that going to look under these different landscapes?
but you know, like you said, you mentioned I think twice, what if energy prices increase? How do you manage that? But if you have a sensible business and they know energy prices are going to increase, there is, from my opinion,
You'll have a plan to deal with those and mitigate it.
to mitigate. High energy prices have in the past meant a limitation on commercial and industrial activity. I no longer believe those two issues are as wedded as they used to be, because the technology now exists for high energy efficiency. And in fact, to the point in a domestic setting where you don't have any energy.
House.
Yeah, you don't have any energy coming into it.
I suppose the other issue as a business is thinking about this Uberization.
The adaptive.
How, if I see an opportunity and I want to take it and grow my business responsibly, can I take it? How can I take it without the EU? Is it going to hamper me or not? What are the opportunities?
Well, then you have to think about, for example, Uber is probably a disruptive force, and highly disruptive force.
Highly disruptive, yeah.
Not just.
Is it bad though?
That's another question.
Yes,
not
it is.
not just globally, not just locally or nationally, but it's a global disruptive force, because it's not just in the UK.
Most things that are disruptive now are global because people see an opportunity and they're looking at the most productive opportunity now. I think people think outside of boundaries, don't they?
Yes, I think before we look at that, I think perhaps it might be useful to explain a little bit about what we mean by disruptive force, because that's a fairly new concept.
Okay.
So I was hoping one of you to.
All right.
Well, I can give you one good example is that somebody brought to my attention an organisation where they have a website and they procure food from all sorts of national suppliers, and people do their monthly shop on that site, and they cut out the entire middle person, and then they do sales through multi-level marketing, and so big supermarkets with their big premises this is the sort of Uberization of your domestic monthly, weekly shopping, and those sorts of things where people just take an idea and completely throw it in the air and see what comes down. Uber has taken out all the middle person. It's just a company, an app, and the final consumer and the person that drives the car, with no servicing innards to pay for.
So let's project that forward. So if you have an Uberization, a disruptive concept, if you have 28 to 35 countries, all of them with a vested interest in, and it's the market that we have been told, stable, predictable, unchanging future, and somebody has a new idea how to do something socially aware, more cost effective, less wasteful? Will it be easier to introduce that new technology in a single country, or trying to penetrate the bureaucracy that is enveloping 35 countries? I'm going to have to say that Uber would probably be introduced quicker in a small country, in a single country. Now that might be argued a good thing by black cab drivers. Certainly it would be, to say that to protect those 28 to 35 countries is a good thing. Other people, perhaps on the breadline, or perhaps people who are not as positive towards large-scale food production or any other element, might be very happy to see a degrading of the monopoly of food.
But I think that disruption is part of the landscape which we definitely need to be aware of now, because it's catching on with style, and if your country or the trade area that you're in can't respond to it or match it, it could mean you become less competitive. But it depends who becomes less competitive. It may be to the benefit of the consumer
or the community.
Or the
I mean,
community.
the way you were saying it, if we are looking at empowering small people, and that's more effectively done at a smaller at a smaller resolution, or rather a higher resolution, a single country rather than large numbers of country, then really it's whether we want what we are currently experiencing to continue, or we want the opportunity for change. But that change could be both positive and negative. And I think that's kind of seemingly where we're going with this. So stability, security, safety, unchanging is probably more within Europe. Dynamic, disturbance, adaptive, disruptive,
scary or exciting
and change. Do we like it the way it is now? Would we like it to be different? And you said that about what would you like in the future. That's what you ask your clients.
Right. What would you like in the future, and then if you like it, how may you get there?
And would it be easier in or out?
Yes.
But the one thing that I've not been asked at any point has been, what would you like the future to look like? I'm only told, be scared of this,
Yes,
be
that's
scared of
true.
that. But why are we never
What
asked?
are your aspirations?
Yes.
How can you get to them? And what's it like to be an older person in the future, in or out of the EU? What's it like to be a young person working in the future,
Karen, that's
in
all
or
very
out?
well, but if you're scared,
Mm.
you're not going to do something
No.
because it's too high risk.
But why are we scared? Are we scared because people are telling us to be scared? Or are we scared because there is a real fear? People are scared of night because they perceive there's a higher risk of crime. The data would question that obvious truth that things are more dangerous when there's less light. Actually, if you look at the total amount of crime, it's very little, there's very little association with day or night. But people feel more uncomfortable walking on their own in the dark than they do walking on their own in the light.
You should list the things that you're a bit worried about, and then go and try and
I think
research them.
that would be a very sensible
Just pick
approach.
the 3 things that worry you, and 3 things that you'd like to see improve, and just go and look at some of the documents and test it out.
Well, I would like people to actually try to project a future.